This is about a neonate. This case we had around 6 months back in our unit. So this is a case about neonate with abdominal distension and feed intolerance. This particular neonate was a male child, birth weight of 996 grams. He was 32 weeks of gestational age. He was born to a 36-year-old mother who was a gravida 4, para 3, 2 abortions, and 1 living child. She was diagnosed to have pregnancy-induced hypertension, 24 weeks of gestational age, and she was on 2 antihypertensives, alpha-methyl-dopa and nifedipine. Significant history of leaking PV for almost a day. Antenatal ultrasound was done, which showed oligohydramnios with AFI of just 4 centimeters. Amniotic fluid index, 4 centimeters in the antenatal USG. And the Doppler had shown reversal of end diastolic flow. She had received a single dose of betamethasone, 12 milligrams. Maxelf was given to the mother in view of eclampsia. Emergency LSCS was done in view of Doppler changes of reversal of end diastolic flow. Baby did not cry immediately after birth, required intermittent positive pressure ventilation for 1 minute. The cord ABG showed a picture of mixed acidosis with pH of 7.02, PCO2 of 69, PO2 of 8, bicarb of 10, with base excess of minus 18. Baby was started on CPAP support in the delivery room, CPAP of 6 centimeters of water with FiO2 40%. Admitted to the NICU, continued on CPAP. Chest X-ray was done, which was showing grade 3 RDS. Insure was done at 2 hours of life. Was also given inotropes in view of low NIBP and CRT of 4 seconds. Insure is once the baby is on CPAP support, if the FiO2 requirement is high, we have to give the first dose of surfactant at 2 hours of life. And baby also required another dose of the same at 10 hours of life. Baby was started on total parenteral nutrition on the same day with a GIR of 5, proteins of glucose infusion rate of 5 with proteins of 3 grams per kg per day and lipids of 1 gram per kg per day. Was also started on trophic feeds with minimal enteral nutrition of 10 ml per kg per day with exclusive breast milk from day of life 1 itself. Express breast milk. EBM is express breast milk. Yeah. Baby was doing all right till day of life 3-4. At that particular time, baby had clinical features with signs of ductus in the form of increased heart rate beyond 160, bounding pulses and wide pulse pressure, with abdominal fullness and altered aspirates. And for this same reason, baby was kept nil by mouth. There were frequent episodes of desaturation while the baby was still on the CPAP support. And in view of this, baby had to be initiated on mechanical ventilation. To close the duct, we had given the baby paracetamol in the dose of 15 milligrams per kg per dose, 6 hourly intravenous preparation. So the first question.
First question is to Dr. Kabra. Now,
thank you.
Just analyze the case and tell us what do you think about this case.
So basically, it's a preterm baby. So basically, it's a baby 32 weeks preterm with a weight just below 1 kilo. So we know that this is a growth restricted baby. Mother is having PIH from 24 weeks and baby is delivered at 32 weeks. So things are not quite right for approximately 8 weeks during the fetal life. Dopplers are abnormal. There is oligohydramnios. That means the amniotic fluid function production from the kidney is also not so great. Now when this baby is born, the blood gas shows severe acidosis. It's mixed, metabolic as well as respiratory. So meaning things have been wrong for quite some period of time. And this baby is also required resuscitation. This mother has received only 1 dose of corticosteroid. Actually there was opportunity to give full course of steroids that would have probably had some additional beneficial impact. Mother did receive magnesium sulfate, which has got some degree of protection effect for the fetus in terms of neurological outcome as well. And so basically this mother also had a leaking PV for 23 hours, so probably chorioamnionitis. So there are more than one reason for this baby to be having the problem probably that is faced in this child: preterm, IUGR, risk of infection, incomplete cover of antenatal steroids, asphyxiated at birth, and then subsequently having a problem like PDA, compounding the overall effect that we are going to see in terms of the problems that we are going to face.
Dr. Bowdekar, do you want to add anything?
No, I really don't know what I'm doing in this panel here because I don't see these cases at all. I don't think my neonatologist has ever called me to see this sort of a thing. I'm totally lost.
Okay, That question I leave it to Abha to answer. It's not my decision. Anyway, but what we, just a minute. What we want to see here is that, these are the normal prototype of cases what we receive in the neonatal intensive care unit at a referral center. And it's not only that you have one risk factor, but you actually, the baby who is born with multiple risk factors. And, as Kishore has beautifully, brought out the topics, what we are looking here is that it's an HGA child. The baby has intrauterine hypoxia. Now, oligohydramnios might be related to, some of the amniotic fluid is lost because of the premature rupture of membranes. But you're worried when you see Doppler, something like this with either absent diastolic flow or reversal of diastolic flow. So, whenever you get the babies like this, suggestive of chronic intrauterine hypoxia, you're always on a guard and you are going to monitor these babies significantly. So what we want to, message we want to give that whenever you get the babies in NICU, one has to look at what is the Doppler report of the child. And if you have something Doppler report which is done in the mother, and if you have something like this, you're going to look out for NEC. You're going to observe whether this baby is at a risk for developing ductus, that is patent ductus arteriosus, and also these babies are, literature has shown that these babies are more at risk of developing intraventricular hemorrhage. So, the analysis of case is very important. There are lots of factors. So, you're, going to observe this baby, monitor this baby right since labor room. And now we give CPAP to the babies in the delivery room. So, these are the small babies who require some sort of, resuscitation. The baby's oxygen requirement is more than 30%, and the baby's Silverman-Anderson score, these are the respiratory scores which we monitor in the delivery room. If these criteria are satisfied, then we give them delivery room right in the CPAP right in the delivery room. Since these are the small babies, we like to start with CPAP of 5 or 6. So since this baby's requirement was more, we had given this baby CPAP in the delivery room. Yeah. Yeah, we'll be covering these points, but we are looking at, we are giving 10 ml per kg per day. So this is which can be given by day 1, day 2, and the ADAPT trial and others have shown that even if you give, do a late feeding, that doesn't decrease the incidence of NEC. So giving them by day 2, day 3, something like 10 ml per kg per day, and you see the response of the babies and do it. Now you're going to be, whenever, as we have said, that if there is a absent or reversal of diastolic flow, you're going to be more cautious, So you give these babies and you're observing because these babies are in NICU.
I'd like to make a point about this early feeding again. In this type of baby, I think you're asking for trouble if you start trophic feeds on day 1 and day 2. This is a take-home message to everybody. I think our hairs have become white seeing newborns for the last 25 years. And in these babies, if you start feeds on day 1, even if they are trophic feeds, in a patient who's born with reversal of diastolic flow, severe IUGR, risk of sepsis with a 23 hours leaking PV, and in a baby who's had a significant RDS, if you start trophic feeds on day 1 of life, I think you're asking for trouble.
I completely second what you say. And these
Okay.
I think whatever people write in books, Western literature is different.
I'm not talking
Indian
about
literature is
Western
different.
literature.
Irrespective.
We are giving them feeding on day 1, day 2 of life. We start with 10 ml per kg. We use exclusive, means we are using only express breast milk for the babies, and we don't have significant increase incidence of NEC.
What is your incidence of NEC in your unit?
Sorry, any incidence of NEC in our unit is less than even 3 to 4%. It's much less than that. And we start on day 1, day 2, and we don't see significant NEC in the babies.
I don't know. I personally would not start feeds on this.
Still, this is of course a controversial issue, and the people either
I think for this type of baby, waiting for 2 days or 3 days is not going to make any difference.
it
When you
doesn't.
have already
That's what we said, we
when you have
start on
already
day 1,
started
day 2.
TPN in this patient, what is the hurry to start feeds? You are asking for trouble and NEC in this baby.
No, what we said, this is what we have done. I'm actually giving you the case which we have done. We have not manipulated the case. And you can start on day 1, day 2, and you can observe this baby. And if you feel, you can stop the feedings of the babies or anything on day 2, day 3 if there are
No,
problems.
ma'am, if the child develops neck, then for next 7-8 days you will not be able to feed the baby. So that is even worse off. When you have so much of high risk factors, we don't lose anything by not feeding for 2 days.
Okay, accepted. you can start little late feedings on the baby on day 4, day 5. We generally start on day 1, day 2 for these babies, the small feedings.
Next question.
So Dr. Kabra, can you tell us, these are the small babies. Generally you have the issues, that whether these babies develop feed intolerance. So can you tell us what is feed intolerance and when do you take it as clinically significant?
So it's a very generic term, and everybody has his own way of defining. And even we read the feeding protocols of various RCTs, there are different definitions. But by and large, we need to identify two terms. One is gastric residuals, aspirates or significant pre-feed aspirates, and the second thing is feed intolerance. So now when you say significant pre-feed aspirates, so meaning I have given the feed and after 2-3 hours I am ready to give next feed, before that I am checking what is being left behind. So when it is 30 or 50% more than what was the volume given earlier, I will call it as a significant gastric residuals. Now feed intolerance by and large, meaning if you have a pre-feed aspirate of 30 to 50% or more, along with abdominal distension or some kind of sign and symptom, maybe not looking good baby, temperature instability, some degree of bradycardia, not having good perfusion. So basically feed intolerance meaning you have having significant residuals, 30 to 50% more than the pre-feed, abdominal distension and some kind of sign symptom that makes you worry. And these are the situation when you see that, you will say, well, I need to go slow, I need to withhold the feeds, and that is probably going to disrupt the protocol. So anything that disrupts the feeding protocol that you have put in the place, then you label it as feed intolerance.
Next question.
So I have a question to Dr. Bavdekar or Dr. Kabra can take it over. That is there a difference in etiology for abdominal distension when you are looking at the term babies and the preterm babies?
As a surgeon, probably no. There's no difference in etiology of abdominal distension in term and preterm. If you're talking of NEC, it's more likely in preterm.
So when you deal with the preterm baby, you are mainly always having NEC as a very top on your list, because meaning sometimes babies on CPAP, it may be just a distended belly, CPAP belly. It may be poor motility, it may be hypokalemia, it may be septic ileus. But when you are dealing with a term baby, probably you are thinking more like surgical things, whether there is Hirschsprung disease, whether there is neuronal intestinal dysplasia, whether there is some kind of dynamic or dynamic surgical obstruction. So probably yes, we need to differentiate when you see distension in a preterm and term, because etiologies are going to be different.
And there are units in the in the country where people sometimes do the routine aspirate before giving the feeds. There are units who do not do aspiration. Both the things are acceptable, but even if you do a pre-feed aspirate, generally the decision is based when the abdominal girth is increased by more than 2 centimeters. So, otherwise if the girth is not increased significantly, you would like to observe the baby and then take your decision as per that. The next slide.
So can I just ask a question? So is it that in a term baby you take it more seriously than a preterm? Because preterm there are a lot of predisposing factors to get abdominal distension. We just talked about all these things. A clean term baby without any sepsis is less likely to get. So if you see it in term, you should worry more about quickly surgical things, because otherwise why would the baby get abdominal
We are
distension?
looking at the different etiologies in the babies who develop, the
Right.
abdominal distension. So in a term baby, you have different etiologies. You will, as Kishore has said, you will look at, of course, by then the baby comes to NICU, the imperforate anus and other thing is ruled out right in the labor room. So you are looking more in terms of whether there is intestinal obstruction.
So that's what I
and
meant,
preterm babies, these are, whenever the abdominal distension is there in first few days after, like this in this baby, day 3, day 4, it is you always keep at the back of mind, because this is a preterm child with so many risk factors about NEC, but generally with the smaller babies, you have the presentation of NEC which comes later on. And the next, so we want to know from Dr. Karmarkar that how do you differentiate between surgical and medical etiology of abdominal distension in a baby like this? Yeah.
Yeah, I think more than differentiate between the etiology, I would say when would you decide surgery may be indicated or not indicated? Because even in a NEC, which is essentially a medical etiology, you may require surgery. So as a surgeon, I think some of the important things where you feel surgery will be indicated is, of course, starting from bilious aspirates, increasing distension, then it could be a X-ray picture which is static, which is not changing. And of course, abdominal findings like discoloration of the abdominal wall or abdominal wall edema. And a classical way is to just press the nail on the abdominal wall. If it leaves a mark, then there's edema. And edema is a very significant thing, especially if we're talking of NEC with gangrene. So these are various ways in which I would think that a surgical cause may be there or surgery is indicated. Apart from, I've been looking at the overall picture. If it's not such a bad abdomen, in a septic setting, sick baby, then I would tend to think more in terms of ileus, which if treated medically may improve. So, yes, sure.
What investigation?
So basically, we start with the basic things. So we need to look at the blood counts, total leukocyte count, platelet counts. We probably do a sepsis workup depending on what is available at a disposal. A blood culture, stool routine and stool culture, blood gas to see for electrolyte disturbances as well, and presence of acidosis. Periodic radiographs, sonography findings, and then some of the newer tools are there, but its role and utility is probably there only in tertiary centers.
Moving on with this particular case, in this case we had done a hemogram for the child. CRP was also done, which was essentially normal. Electrolytes were done, showing a sodium of 134, potassium of 4.5. ABG again showed a partially compensated metabolic acidosis, the pH of 7.27, PCO2 of 30, PO2 of 76, bicarb of 14, and base excess of -11. This was the X-ray picture of this baby taken on the same day. Distension of abdomen and altered aspirates when baby was NBM. And this X-ray picture is showing a feature of dilated bowel loops with asymmetrical gas pattern. This baby was then extubated to NIMV support by day of life 6, which is a non-invasive mode of support from the mechanical ventilation. The inotropes were tapered and then they were omitted. There was, however, difficulty in weaning off from the non-invasive respiratory support in this baby. We did an echo at that particular time, which showed a PDA of size 2.5 millimeters with the LA by the aortic root ratio showing 1.6, which is significant. So it was a hemodynamically significant PDA. The feeds were restarted on day of life 8 again with express breast milk, and they were advanced according to the protocol of the unit. And baby reached full feeds, that was 150 ml per kg per day by day of life 15. By that particular time, the baby's weight had just reached 1 kg. Again, there were repeated desaturation episodes while the baby was on the non-invasive support, and hence again baby was put on mechanical ventilation. At this particular time, on examination, there was distension of abdomen with sluggish peristalsis, discoloration of the scrotum, and there was gross blood in stools. Then we did the investigations, which revealed a sodium of 118, potassium of 4.6. Hemogram showed thrombocytopenia with total counts of 3,400. ABG again showing a partially compensated metabolic acidosis.
So things are already gone terribly wrong here. So we have a triad, classic triad of thrombocytopenia, metabolic acidosis, and hyponatremia. So probably this baby is already in stage 3 or 3A or B of necrotizing enterocolitis. One of the things that worries to a newborn specialist working in intensive care is a necrotizing enterocolitis. If you are able to prevent it, well and good. If we are got up with 3A, 3B, it is a nightmare for the whole team as well as the family. The outcome remains miserable, and the treatments, once it occurs, is very, very limited. So it's a nightmare situation.
Further on with the case, this was the X-ray picture at that particular time. So this X-ray on day of life 16 was showing classical signs of pneumatosis intestinalis with pneumoperitoneum as evidenced on the X-ray, the classical football sign. What are the differential diagnoses that we have to consider at that particular time on day of life 16?
means this is, benign feed intolerance, we are not looking at this stage. But as the NEC presents, suggestion of right in this baby, right from day 2, day 3 of life, whenever you get in like this baby, the RT aspirates, which are, you are getting positive RT aspirate, you actually don't know whether it's a benign feed intolerance or this could be the initial non-specific signs of NEC. So you require to keep the babies under observation with a high index of suspicion, which is more important. The sepsis with ileus, you can have similar presentation. At times you have surgical etiologies like this, and you can also have the babies having spontaneous intestinal perforation. Sometimes these are the babies who are, treated for ductus with endomethacin. The babies can get intestinal perforation. And in our unit with the babies like having high risk for situation for giving endomethacin, other thing, babies having thrombocytopenia, we use paracetamol for the closure of ductus. It is 15 milligram per kg per day, 6 hourly, 4 dosages, and we give it for about 5 to 7 days. We had initially done a case series and it has shown significantly that it helps in closure of ductus, so it is given in the babies which are high risk babies. And subsequently Dr. Kabra had done a RCT and it has shown a great success. Almost I think in their study they got 90 to 100% closure of ductus by giving paracetamol. So we use endomethacin, we also use ibuprofen, and we also use paracetamol for the closure of ductus. This particular baby we had used paracetamol. The next.
Just one comment.
Yeah.
I mean, malrotation will not come in the DD because it's classically without distension. So it's a case where the abdomen will be scaphoid. So I think that should not come. Yes.
Risk factors for NEC.
I think we have said it over. You can go next. The risk factors of ABC, of course, everyone present here knows. We are looking not only in the setting of premature babies, you are looking at whether the babies have insult like hypertension, hypoxia, ductus, whether there is need for multiple transfusion, umbilical vessel catheterization, formula feeding. These are the risk factors which are described, over the period of time for the development of necrotizing enterocolitis. The next. And this is the pathophysiology. You know that basically it is, a prematurity is at the center of thing. You have, the immature immune system of the babies. You have infection and inflammation, and plus something like aggressive feeding, the formula feeding, and even the babies having, congenital heart diseases, ductus. This all will predispose baby for the development of development of necrotizing enterocolitis. Next. And generally, as we have said, this is the age of onset. The more preterm is the baby, the later is the presentation. So in babies who are less than 30 weeks, you have average presentation of about day 20 of life, while the babies which are bigger babies, you have presentation earlier coming in the first week of life. So this is the age of presentation. The next slide. Because the smaller babies, you are starting feeds late, so the presentation is going to be full feeds, the babies will achieve late. So you have the presentation which is late, and this is the Bell's classification for the various stages of necrotizing enterocolitis. So you are always worried about when you are in stage 3A and stage 3B, which are the babies are critically ill with intestinal perforation. The next slide. So Dr. Bavdekar, when do we call Santosh?
Now.
You don't call him?
I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, I don't really want
So
to.
Santosh, when do you want to come in?
Well, whenever you call. But yes, I would certainly like to be involved right at the beginning, not wait for the perforation to occur, and come in at a stage when the X-ray is showing fixed distension. If you do an X-ray today, shows a dilated loop, and you do it after 8 hours, 10 hours, and the picture is the same, then I think that's the earliest time a surgeon should come in.
So we have to call again the important message is that you involve the surgeons right in the beginning and not when the perforation has already occurred. So you call the surgeon in time, get them involved in the management of baby, so you also have someone to share the responsibilities. So we would like to call in the surgeons. The next. And yeah.
So, in the course of this particular baby, there was further worsening in the baby. Transillumination test was there on day of life 16, and a glove drain procedure was done on the same day.
They found the baby to be too sick, so our
shift to the
surgeons had
OT,
put a glove in at that time. So Kishore, can you tell us the medical management? of
So
the baby?
first of all, like, classifying NEC, as you have said, suspect, definite, and then, like, so depending on that, we need to formulate. But by and large, there is very little one actually is able to do once the NEC is diagnosed. What is generally done is keeping baby nil by mouth, nil per oral, putting on parenteral nutrition if the option is available, giving antibiotic as per your unit's policy and what we identify in or the flora. And then periodic monitoring. One is bedside monitoring continuously, the heart rate, the blood pressure, capillary refill time. X-rays, as Dr. Karmarkar rightly pointed that 6 hourly, 8 hourly, 12 hourly X-rays to see whether the bowel loops are fixed. Periodic sonographies, and then monitoring blood count, blood gases and electrolytes to look for if something is, acidosis is occurring or platelets are dropping, that means the problems in the intestines are worsening. So by and large, the treatment is like, supportive, nil by mouth, TPN, antibiotics, and radiological monitoring.
One question. I mean, no, I have one about medical management. I mean, we used to give a lot of low molecular weight dextran to improve intestinal blood flow. And nowadays, there are, I think, reports of pentoxifylline. So, is there some also,
as far as,
also of this, I forget the name anyway.
Yeah, basically, like, meaning generally, like, I don't blame this surgeon. They always want to cut, chop if it's possible. They have therapeutic exuberance. As a medical people, we are more conservative. So it's just to do with the being a physician. Now coming to the low molecular weight dextran, there are no control trial to say that this is good thing or a bad thing. People also sometimes give albumin. With pentoxifylline, only one control trial in treatment of sepsis because it's believed but never been replicated, and more so over, like, pentoxifylline is not necessarily easily available. So by and large, you can say all the things that are elaborated here are remain experimental, not being rigorously tested, so cannot be recommended at this time. Even drugs like giving gentamicin or vancomycin or antibiotics, once the NEC is developed, remains very, very questionable.
Nitric oxide?
Not really, not really.
So tell us that, what is your stepwise surgical management in NEC? When do you
Yes.
prefer to do what? Means
Okay,
as a,
sure.
when we send a call to the surgeons and we have, we have classified the babies into various stages, what do we expect surgeons to do at a particular stage?
Yes, I think, if you have the extreme case where there's perforation and with lot of ascites and leak, and in a sick child, I think, as you did in this case, then first thing would be to just put a small drain and empty the abdomen. And with the deflation of abdomen, if things improve, and if the child's GC improves, then think of exploration. So that's the extreme stage. But if I'm called in early, and if there's a fixed loop, fixed X-ray pattern, then I think a early, quick exploration, maybe not a huge exploration, not a huge incision, but a quick, small incision and a quick look can be very effective. For example, sometimes it's just one segment of the bowel which is involved. And if that is so, a early intervention, explore the bowel and take out that affected segment, resect and just make 2 stomas, can be life-saving. So they are essentially, if you go in early, explore, if it's limited segment, do a resection, but don't anastomose. If you anastomose, there's chances that it will leak. So make 2 stomas, bring it out, and in due course you can go in and anastomose. If I go in and it's an extensive NEC across the entire bowel, then one would not do anything, just put the whole bowel inside with the hope that you can do a second loop laparotomy after the child's condition is improved, hoping that the affected length of segment is less, the other bowel has recovered, and then you can do a limited resection. So it will vary from case to case. NEC is a huge spectrum of conditions. So I think we'll have to tailor the approach. So tailoring the approach for every case and doing minimal is the key.
So I think this we will go further in the case because this is we have already.
This particular baby was then continued on TPN from day of life 16, restarted on feeds after 2 weeks, and baby had reached full feeds by day of life 40. Again on day of life 45, distension of abdomen was noted, there was a large mass which was felt in the right iliac fossa. What
What should we think at this stage for this?
So probably this is a case of NEC where there are probably adhesion, stricture or obstruction that is occurred.
Yeah, correct.
Then again, on the same day, exploration of the abdomen was taken and which revealed that there were presence of intestinal adhesions which were released, and a second Glaudrin was also inserted in the left iliac fossa. Baby was further continued on TPN. However, baby could not be started on enteral feeds this particular time due to recurrent distension of the abdomen. Also, the blood culture had shown growth of Klebsiella pneumoniae sensitive only to polymyxin B. Unfortunately, this particular baby we could not salvage, and baby died because of post-surgical complications of NEC.
I like the way you said post-surgical. I would have said complications of.
I agree. The minute Shaumin said it, I realized that.
I mean, my
Yeah,
first
so
attention
you
went.
Yeah. So we want the surgeons to be on the toes that, this is, so we agree it's not the post-surgical complications, this is okay, so accept. Is it over?
No,
Yeah. So what is, so Kishore, tell us that is it possible to prevent NEC?
Probably you can reduce the burden of NEC by adopting various strategies, but you cannot completely eliminate it. It's also the function of what kind of population you are dealing with. So Cyrus was concerned about introducing feeds rightly, and traditional teaching has been that you have a baby who is IUGR, abnormal Doppler, probably we need to be very courageous to introduce feeds in practice probably on day 1, even though ADEPT trial day 3, 4 versus day 5, 6 showing no difference. Now coming to prevention of NEC, one thing is prevent the prematurity, one is the most possible cause, then giving antenatal steroids which helps in maturation of all possible organs of the fetus, then initiation of all other supportive measures, early treatment of chorioamnionitis, and then nowadays we know that probiotics is a very good thing to do, although debate remains which probiotics is better. In our own unit, we had a less than 1.5 kg, 7% incidence of NEC pre-probiotic, and subsequently following introduction, it has gone down to 3.5%, so 50% reduction. Those units who have a higher rate will find more difference and outcome. Those who are having lower background rate probably may not find statistical significance, and that's what probably reflected from study to studies, even though 10,000 or babies have been recruited in studies like this. Then few studies, RCT showing role of glutamine, arginine, showing benefit, but never have been replicated in large things. And then one of the very important thing is having standardized feeding protocol. If we are having a unit where 3-4 consultants are there and the feeding regimes are decided by individual swims and fancy, so if you have a standardized feeding regime, then you know when to start, when to stop. In giving breast milk, as far as possible, if mother's milk is not available, donor milk. These probably are the strategies. If you have a baby who is hemodynamically unstable in the beginning, probably don't introduce the feed. If baby is on inotrop, probably you'll be extremely cautious. So yeah, it is possible to prevent, but probably not to the full extent.
I agree with Kishore, and of course, feeding colostrum to the babies is going to be beneficial. The donor milk has less protection on the prevention of NEC as compared to the fresh milk. The next, and these are all this. We also have the the role of antenatal corticosteroids, and as written here, the bank milk is not as protective as fresh milk given to the babies, and this all is already covered. The next. And then these are the prophylactic enteral antibiotics were studied, and of course, oral antibiotics reduce the incidence of NEC in low birth weight infants, but again, not very conclusive. The next, this oral immunoglobulins, no reduction in the incidence of NEC, need for surgery related to NEC or death related to NEC, so there is no role of oral immunoglobulins. This Kishore has already said about arginine supplementation. This and again the glutamine supplementation, the prophylactic supplementation of glutamine did not affect the incidence of NEC, mortality, growth or the long-term outcomes. And probiotics he has already covered. And the next I would like to say about the role of lactoferrin, which we have not said here. It's a multinutrient protein now currently available as a nutrient, and the lactoferrin is shown to be beneficial in the prevention of NEC, because it is, it mitigates the pro-inflammatory stage which is basically required for development of NEC. So the lactoferrin in future is going to be a in the prevention of necrotizing enterocolitis. The next. So coming to the take-home message, I would like to ask the panelists to have take-home message, and then we have just 10 seconds left. So this we have already said that it is less common in the term and late preterm infants. Intestinal immaturity, aggressive feeding, inflammatory response to the interactions between the intestinal barrier and the luminal microbes are key contributors to NEC. The next. Early stage NEC, it is difficult to differentiate from sepsis. The intramural gas, that is pneumatosis, and the portal venous gas are pathognomonics in these settings for the diagnosis of NEC, and pneumoperitoneum, a sign of intestinal perforation, and the gangrene with severe metabolic acidosis, severe thrombocytopenia, dilated intestinal route require surgical intervention, and we have already said about lactoferrin. I would like to have one take-home message from the panelists before we conclude.
One question, sir, I want to ask.
Yeah. Sure.
What was the total, please don't mind my saying something. What was the total duration of this baby in the hospital?
49. Yeah.
40 to 45 days.
Could we, Dr. Karmarkar, a specific question to you. You are my old friend and presently also my friend.
Thank you.
I want to know, could we have intervened in this baby from surgical point of view early in the phase of the illness of the child? That is the question.
Well, I mean, the obvious answer would be yes.
Yes.
But I mean, maybe at the stage when you showed that first X-ray, which is quite typical of NEC, generalized distension with some ascitic fluid in the abdomen. At that point, depending on the GC of the child, it could have a small look laparotomy may have helped. If it was a small segment which is dusky, maybe, but this is...
Day 5, day 6,
I cannot give you a very definite answer in a specific case. I mean...
I just want
What
to
is the-
add one. I just want to add
one more point, sir.
Sir,
for
but
the
let me
urologist.
answer because it's related.
Yeah, please.
There was a study published in NEJM where once you have a perforation in NEC, whether you put a glow drain versus you do a open surgery, laparotomy, whether it makes difference in the final outcome. And the answer was it was no. So probably these are the cases who are destined to perform badly, irrespective of whatever you do. Once you have perforation, it's your nightmare.
Now, pre-perforation.
Pre-perforation, meaning we do not have meaning what he said, but he has to say.
Second point, pressing point, the systemic reviews on probiotics for the prevention of necrotizing enterocolitis. What is your last word on that? Because the reviews, the meta-analysis and everything, Cochrane database also shows that it is preventable. And I know of some trials which are going on at certain places. I don't know what is the combination of probiotic they are using actually. I don't know the formulation. What is your say on that?
I am using it. I recommend people who believe use it.
Use it.
Yeah.
So which is the combination you are using?
So we just following what KM Pune started using.
Now
2
what
years.
is that KM Pune protocol? We don't
Darolac.
know.
They use Darolac. So
Danolac.
for a baby who is more than a kilo,
Right.
they give half sachet.
So-
For a baby who is less than a kilo, they give 1/4 sachet.
Right.
Twice a day.
Yeah, just one observation. I mean, I don't have anything to do with neonatology, but it's surprising and in a way disappointing to see that even neonates are having bugs which are sensitive only to polymyxin.
Yeah.
I mean, how often do you see that? And it's really a scary scenario if it's happening. How often do you see like a multi-drug resistance bug in
There are
the neonatal
published
setting.
this thing where in different parts of the country you get the Klebsiella, which are multi-resistant Klebsiella. In one of the studies, it is shown to the tune of almost about 60 to 63%.
In neonates.
Yes, yes, in
That's-
neonates.
We
it
are
is, yeah.
reflection of the same society, so we
Society.
follow the
So
same
it's
trait
reflecting
that are
on the
followed in
neonates
adults
as well.
and pediatrics.
Yeah, it's very scary. Yeah, sure, agreed. I mean, we see it in adults, younger children, but
I mean,
it's
that is obviously hospital acquired. You don't require any explanation for that.
Yeah, it's obviously hospital required. So, I mean, whether it's a newborn or whether it's an adult, the same bugs are there, and these super bugs which are causing the problems are there all over. Just one last point. The second surgery that was done, when they said a glove drain was put, when there was a mass there, could something more have been done at that stage?
The baby was too sick. I think the surgeon said the baby was too sick. So,
I mean, a baby with NEC is going to be sick, yeah. So, if you're going to just say it's too sick,
that
then
is that,
nothing happens.
everyone knows that the baby is with NECS.
Yeah, that's precisely why I'm
so,
saying.
But this was their decision that, this, and they put the glove drain, and probably this was the surgeon's decision.
I think another point is that neonatologists and surgeons have to talk to each other and not just leave something that that is his point of view and this is my point of view. I think if we talk to each other, probably the outcomes would be better. And number two is probably sometimes we need to push the surgeon and sometimes we need to pull them back. So if the surgeon has got some rapport with the neonatologist, I think things work better. And I think that's the case everywhere in whichever part of the world you go to. So communication between doctors on the case is extremely important.
Especially in things like NEC.
Exactly.
Where
there is no
picture-
fixed thing.
Picture can change
Yes.
every 8 hours.
Exactly.
So, Cyrus, this was just the extreme case presented. This is not the day-to-day things that we see in the KEM hospital. This was
No,
the
no.
extreme case to just highlight.
This is
highlight
not
what
this.
worst can
It's
happen.
not that we don't talk to our surgeons.
No, don't get me wrong. This is not a. See, we are here to learn, and we need to know what better we could have done for the patient. We are not here just for an academic discourse. If we are, then we've sort of missed the bus a long way ago. We just need to improve our things, and discussion is very important, even if that means accepting certain, points which are not in our favor.
Can I ask
This is
one
not a criticism, it's just
basic-
a discussion.
Just a basic question for my curiosity. What's an acceptable incidence of NEC in a NICU?
So it's
For my-
basically you just have to go to benchmarking, look at what units are doing. So what they do in US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they have their own network hospitals. And they say who is performing best. So you try to get there. Suppose somebody has incidence of 4% and somebody has 8%. So you would say that lowest acceptable is that.
Thank you.
Thank you.